My daughter left me alone in the hospital, and the truth I discovered there changed my life. I never imagined the day would come when I would be lying in a cold hospital bed, staring at the white ceiling and feeling my heart break into 1,000 pieces as I watched my only daughter turn her back and walk out the door without looking back. My name is Margaret. I'm 63 years old, and throughout my entire life, I believed I had done everything right as a mother. I worked hard, sacrificed my dreams, gave up relationships, trips, moments that were just mine, all to ensure that my daughter Rebecca had the best possible life. I raised her alone after my husband Thomas abandoned us when she was only 5 years old, and since then I dedicated every second of my existence to being the perfect mother. I bought brand-name clothes when I myself wore old pieces, paid for the best private school even while working 2 jobs, took her to dance classes, swimming, piano, everything she asked for. When she grew up and wanted to study medicine at an expensive university, I sold my only property, a small apartment that I had achieved with so much effort, to pay the tuition. I moved to a tiny rented room, worked 12 hours a day as a nurse, and still did extra shifts on weekends just to ensure she didn't have to worry about money while studying. Rebecca was always my absolute priority, my reason for living, and I was certain that all that sacrifice would be worth it when she became the successful woman I always dreamed she would be. But on that cold October day, lying in that hospital bed, with a chest pain that doctors said was the beginning of a heart attack caused by extreme stress and exhaustion, I realized that perhaps I had gone wrong somewhere along the way. It all started 3 days earlier, when I fainted in the middle of my shift at the hospital where I had worked for over 20 years. I had been feeling tired for weeks, with chest pains and shortness of breath, but I ignored all the signs because I couldn't afford to miss work. Rebecca had just graduated from medical school and was doing her residency at a prestigious hospital, but she had just bought an extremely expensive apartment and kept calling me asking for financial help to pay the bills. I always said yes, even if it meant skipping meals or not buying my own medications. That morning, I was helping to move a patient when I felt a sharp pain cut through my chest like a sharp blade. My legs gave way, my vision became blurred, and the next thing I remember is waking up on a stretcher in the emergency room, surrounded by worried colleagues. They did all possible tests, and the diagnosis came like a punch to the stomach. My heart was weak, I was completely exhausted physically and emotionally, and if I didn't get absolute rest and radically change my lifestyle, I could have a serious heart attack at any moment. The doctor was clear. I needed at least 2 weeks hospitalized for observation and stabilization, and after that, months of rest at home. He also said I would need someone to take care of me because my condition was too delicate for me to be alone. The first person I called, of course, was Rebecca, my daughter, my only true love, the person for whom I had given everything. My hand trembled as I dialed her number, and when she answered with that distracted voice she always used when she was busy, I felt a lump in my throat. I explained what had happened, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to sound too dramatic because I knew how she hated when I was exaggerated, as she used to say. I said the doctors wanted to keep me hospitalized and that it would be good to have her around. There was silence on the other end of the line, a silence that lasted too long and made me feel a chill down my spine. Then Rebecca sighed in that impatient way she had developed in recent years and said she was very busy with her residency. She had back-to-back shifts, important surgeries. She couldn't just drop everything to stay at the hospital with me. I felt my heart sink, but I tried to understand. After all, she was a doctor. She had responsibilities, patients depending on her. I said it was okay, that I understood, that she didn't need to stay all the time, just stop by to see me from time to time. She mumbled something about trying to stop by when she had a break and hung up quickly. I stayed there, holding the phone against my chest, feeling the tears silently stream down my face as I heard the beeps of the monitors around me and saw other patients receiving visits from children, grandchildren, husbands. On the first day hospitalized, I kept waiting. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, my heart raced, thinking it was Rebecca coming to see me. I fixed my hair, wiped away the tears, practiced a smile so as not to worry her. But she didn't show up. I sent messages asking how she was, saying I was fine, that it was nothing serious, just a scare. She responded with short messages, quick emojis, always saying she was in the middle of something important. On the second day, I tried calling again. She answered in a hurry. I could hear voices in the background, the typical noise of a busy hospital. I asked if she could stop by, even if just for 5 minutes, just so I could see her face. Rebecca got irritated, said I was being dramatic, that I wasn't dying. It was just a blood pressure and fatigue problem. She said she had more important things to do, patients who really needed her, and that I should stop acting like I was terminally ill. Her words cut me deeper than any physical pain I was feeling. I mumbled an apology, said she was right, that I was exaggerating. She hung up without saying goodbye. It was on the third day that everything fell apart. It was a rainy Thursday, and I was feeling particularly bad. The medications made me dizzy, I could barely eat, and the loneliness was consuming me in a way I had never experienced before. I watched other patients receiving flowers, chocolates, constant visits, and I wondered what I had done wrong. Had I been a bad mother? Had I been too suffocating? Too distant? I replayed every moment of Rebecca's childhood, every sacrifice I had made, trying to find the exact moment when everything had gone wrong. It was then that my cell phone rang. It was Rebecca. My heart leaped with joy. I thought she was finally calling to say she was coming to see me. I answered with a voice full of hope, but what came next destroyed me. Rebecca wasn't calling to see how I was. She was calling to ask me for money. She said she had an incredible opportunity to take a specialization course, but she needed $5,000 immediately. Her voice was anxious, almost desperate, and she spoke quickly, as if she was afraid I would hang up. I was paralyzed, holding the phone with trembling hands. I barely had money for my own medical bills. I had just spent all my savings to help her with the new apartment, and she was asking me for more? When I hesitated, when I said with a weak voice that I didn't have that money, that I was hospitalized and would need financial help for my own treatments from now on, Rebecca exploded. Her voice became cold, cutting like ice. She said I always did this, always found an excuse when she needed me, that I was being selfish, that I never truly supported her, that everything I had done for her wasn't enough. She said I was manipulative, that I was using my illness to get attention, to make her feel guilty. Each word was a stab, and I was there, mute, unable to respond, feeling my world collapse around me. When I finally managed to speak, with a voice choked with tears, I asked if she could at least come see me, if we could talk in person, if she didn't feel any concern about my health. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Rebecca said something I will never forget until the day I die. She said she was tired of me, tired of my needs, tired of having to carry the weight of being my only family. She said I had made choices in my life, that I had chosen to be a mother, and that now I had to deal with the consequences of those choices alone. She said it wasn't her responsibility to take care of me, that she had her own life to live, and that if I had thought better before sacrificing everything, maybe I wouldn't be in this situation now. I couldn't respond. Tears fell uncontrollably. My chest hurt not from the illness, but from the emotional pain that was consuming me inside. And then Rebecca said she would come to the hospital, not to see me, but to pick up some documents I had kept for her, certificates and important papers she needed. She said she would stop by in the late afternoon. When she hung up, I stayed holding the phone to my chest, sobbing quietly so as not to disturb the other patients. A nurse came in to check my vital signs and was alarmed when she saw my blood pressure skyrocket. She gave me a sedative and stayed holding my hand until I stopped crying. She didn't know what had happened, but her kindness as a stranger touched me more than anything my own daughter had done for me in years. Rebecca showed up at the hospital around 6 in the evening. I had fixed myself up as best I could, combed my hair, put on a little lipstick I kept in my purse, all to not look as sick and pathetic as I felt. When she entered the room, my heart jumped. She was beautiful as always, with her impeccable white coat, hair tied in an elegant bun, perfect makeup. She looked so professional, so successful, so distant. She didn't even look at me properly, just gave a quick nod and asked where the documents were. I pointed to my purse on the nightstand next to the bed, feeling a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. Rebecca grabbed the papers, checked them quickly, and was about to leave when I found the courage to speak. My voice came out weak, almost a whisper, but I needed to say it. I said I was sorry, that I didn't know what I had done to make her hate me so much, but that I loved her more than anything in this world and always would. I said I understood she was busy, that she had her life, but that if she could just give me a few minutes, a few seconds of her time, it would mean the world to me. Rebecca stopped at the door but didn't turn around. Her back became tense, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something, that maybe there was a chance for reconnection. But then she just shook her head and left, her footsteps echoing down the hallway until they disappeared completely. I stayed there, looking at the empty door, feeling as if a part of me had died. That night was the worst of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop crying, and the doctors were so worried they had to increase my medication. I felt completely alone in the world, and for the first time in my life, I questioned whether all that sacrifice had been worth it. I had given everything for Rebecca, absolutely everything, and in the end, when I needed her most, she had abandoned me. I felt like an idiot, a fool who had wasted her entire life on an illusion of maternal love that was apparently one-sided. The next morning, it was still dark outside when I heard a soft knock on my room door. I was awake, staring at the ceiling, lost in dark thoughts about my uncertain future, and my daughter who didn't want to know about me. I mumbled a weak, "Come in," expecting it to be some nurse with more medication. But who came through the door was someone I didn't expect. Dorothy, a 78-year-old lady who was hospitalized in the room next to mine. I had seen her a few times in the hallway during physical therapy, always surrounded by children and grandchildren, always smiling despite being there because of severe pneumonia. Dorothy approached my bed dragging her IV stand, her kind eyes full of compassion. She said she had heard me crying the night before through the thin wall and that she couldn't stop thinking about me. She pulled up a chair and sat next to my bed, took my hand with her wrinkled but warm hands, and said something that caught me by surprise. "I know exactly what you're going through, dear, because I've been in your place." I looked at Dorothy with confusion. She had so many children, so many grandchildren visiting. How could she understand my loneliness? But Dorothy smiled sadly and began to tell her story. And as she spoke, I felt as if I was looking at a mirror of my future. Dorothy told me she had had 4 children, all of whom she had raised alone after her husband died young in a work accident. She had worked 3 jobs simultaneously to support the family, had never taken vacations, never bought anything for herself. Everything went to the children. She put them all through college, helped each one buy their first homes, took care of the grandchildren when they were born. For years, she was the perfect matriarch, always available, always giving, always sacrificing. But then she got sick for the first time, 5 years ago. She needed serious surgery and expected her children to reciprocate all the care she had given. But one by one, they found excuses. They were busy with work, with their own children, with scheduled trips. Dorothy went through the surgery alone and stayed 3 weeks in the hospital without a single visit. She said that destroyed her completely, that she fell into a deep depression, that she questioned her entire existence. But then, she did something that changed everything. Dorothy squeezed my hand and looked me in the eyes with an intensity that made me pay full attention. She said that after that traumatic experience, she made a decision. She was going to stop waiting for her children to be grateful, stop living to please other people, and start living for herself for the first time in her life. She started therapy, something she had always thought was nonsense before. She started setting boundaries with her children, saying no when they asked for money or last-minute babysitting. She started spending money on herself, doing things she had always wanted to do but never had, painting classes, solo trips, dinners at nice restaurants. And something incredible happened. Her children, who had taken her for granted their whole lives, suddenly started paying attention. They were shocked when she said no for the first time. They were offended when she scheduled a trip to Europe instead of being available to take care of the grandchildren. But over time, something changed. They started respecting her more. They started visiting her not because they needed something, but because they genuinely wanted to see her. They started being interested in her life, in the things she was doing. Their relationship became more balanced, healthier, more real. I listened to Dorothy with tears streaming down my face. But this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition. She was describing exactly the mistake I had made with Rebecca. I had become invisible as a person, existing only as an inexhaustible source of resources and support. I had never had my own identity beyond being Rebecca's mother. I had never set boundaries, never said no, never prioritized my own needs. Dorothy told me that the painful truth is that when you give yourself completely to another person, even if it's your child, you end up becoming invisible. People only value what can be lost, and if you're always available, always sacrificing, you become part of the landscape taken for granted. She said I needed to make a radical change if I wanted to save not only my physical health, but my mental health and even my relationship with Rebecca. Dorothy stayed with me all morning, and for the first time in days, I felt less alone. She introduced me to other patients on the floor, women of different ages who had surprisingly similar stories. There was Patricia, a 50-year-old woman who had given a kidney to her drug-addicted son, who never got sober and still blamed her for all his problems. There was Linda, 65 years old, who had spent all her retirement savings helping her daughter open 3 different businesses that failed, and now was broke and sick while her daughter lived comfortably and rarely called. There was Susan, 70 years old, who had raised 6 grandchildren because her daughter needed to find herself. And now that the grandchildren were adults, none of them visited her or thanked her. Story after story, all with the same central theme: women who had completely sacrificed themselves and were now reaping abandonment and ingratitude. But all of them, guided by Dorothy, had begun their journeys of rediscovery and boundary setting. They formed something Dorothy called the Circle of Recovery, an informal support group where they met weekly to share experiences, give advice, and encourage each other. Dorothy invited me to participate as soon as I got out of the hospital, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe I didn't need to be stuck in that role of victim, of rejected and lonely mother. Maybe there was a path to recover my life and my dignity. Dorothy gave me a notebook that morning, a beautiful blue-covered notebook she had bought in the hospital gift shop. She told me to start writing about my feelings, about my forgotten dreams, about the person I was before I became just Rebecca's mother. She said that reconnecting with my own identity would be the first step to my recovery. I held that notebook as if it were a lifeline, and that night, for the first time in days, I managed to sleep without crying. In the following days, I started writing. At first it was difficult. The words came slowly, stained with tears. I wrote about who I was before having Rebecca, a young nurse full of dreams, who loved to travel, who wanted to see the world, who loved painting watercolors on weekends, who had a group of friends she went out dancing with. I wrote about how I had gradually abandoned all of this, how I had cut contact with my friends because I didn't have time for them, how I had sold all my painting materials to pay for Rebecca's diapers, how I had canceled a dream trip to Italy because I discovered I was pregnant. I wasn't regretting having had Rebecca, but I was realizing how much of myself I had lost in the process. I had become an empty shell, existing only to serve another person, and now that person was discarding me as if I were nothing. But the more I wrote, the more I began to feel something changing inside me. Anger began to appear, a healthy anger I had repressed for years. anger at Thomas for abandoning us, anger at Rebecca for treating me as disposable, but mainly anger at myself for having allowed all of this, for having become a martyr, for having accepted crumbs of affection as if they were great gestures of love. Dorothy came to visit me every day, and our conversations became improvised therapy sessions. She asked me difficult questions. Why do you think you need to buy your daughter's love? Why do you consider yourself less important than her? What are you afraid will happen if you start prioritizing yourself? The answers were painful to face, but necessary. On the 5th day of hospitalization, something unexpected happened. Dr. Harrison, the cardiologist who was taking care of me, entered the room with a serious expression. He said he needed to have a frank conversation with me. He sat down and explained that my condition was more serious than I was taking into account. He said that the emotional stress I was living through was as harmful as any physical illness, and that if I didn't make drastic changes in my life, I could have a fatal heart attack in the coming months. He said he had access to my previous hospitalization notes and saw that this wasn't the first time I had problems related to stress. He said I needed to understand that taking care of my mental health was as important as taking my heart medications. He strongly recommended that I start therapy and, more importantly, that I distance myself from toxic relationships, even if they were with family members. Those words coming from a doctor, said with such seriousness, finally made something click in my head. I was literally dying because of the unhealthy dynamic with my daughter. I had to choose my life or Rebecca's approval. That night, I made a decision. I was going to leave that hospital and completely rebuild my life. I was no longer going to beg for Rebecca's attention, no longer going to sacrifice myself hoping for gratitude, no longer going to put my needs last. I wrote a list in my blue notebook, things I was going to do for the first time in decades. I was going to paint again. I was going to join Dorothy's group. I was going to look for a therapist. I was finally going to take that trip to Italy that I had postponed almost 40 years ago. I was going to enroll in a photography course I had always wanted to take. I was going to reduce my workload and finally enjoy my life while I still had health for it. And most importantly, I was going to establish clear boundaries with Rebecca. I was no longer going to be available 24 hours a day. I was no longer going to give money without thinking about my own needs. I was no longer going to accept being treated as disposable. When I was discharged from the hospital a week later, I notified Rebecca by message. She responded with a thumbs-up emoji, nothing more. She didn't ask how I was, didn't offer help, nothing. And you know what? For the first time, it didn't destroy me. I accepted it. Dorothy picked me up from the hospital on discharge day, along with 2 other women from the group, Patricia and Linda. They took me to a lovely cafe near my house, bought cake and cappuccino, and we stayed there talking for hours. I felt more loved and cared for by those women I barely knew than I had felt by my own daughter in years. When I got home, to that small room I rented, instead of feeling depressed about the cramped space, I felt motivated. I started reorganizing everything, threw away old things, put new photos on the walls, bought plants. I transformed a corner of the room into a small painting studio. I was recreating my space as a reflection of the new life I was building. A week after discharge, Rebecca called. My heart raced when I saw her name on the screen, all those old mother instincts screaming for me to answer immediately, to be available, to help with whatever she needed. But I took a deep breath, remembered the conversations with Dorothy, Dr. Harrison's words, and let it ring a few times before answering. When I answered, I tried to keep my voice neutral, calm. Rebecca started the conversation the usual way, talking about herself, about work, about how tired she was. Then she got to the point. She needed money again, this time to buy a new car because hers had broken down. She spoke quickly, assuming I would say yes as always, but this time I said no. The silence on the other end of the line was shocking. Then Rebecca asked if I had heard correctly. I repeated, with a firmer voice than I imagined I could achieve, "No, Rebecca, I can't give you that money. I have my own medical bills to pay and need to take care of my health first." Rebecca became furious. She started screaming, saying I was being selfish, that I was never there when she needed me. What kind of mother was I? It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. Instead of panicking, instead of apologizing and giving in as I always had, I stood firm. I said calmly, "Rebecca, I love you, but I can no longer put your needs before mine to the point of harming my own health and life. I was in the hospital for a week, and you didn't show up to see me even once. You treated me like I was an ATM, not like a person who is sick and needing care. This needs to change." Rebecca was speechless for a second, and then said something cruel. "You were never a good mother, really. You only did those things for me because you wanted to feel important, because you had nothing else in your life. Don't come now playing the victim." Those words should have destroyed me, but instead, I felt a strange clarity. I said, "If that's how you feel, then maybe it's better we have some space from each other. When you're ready to have a relationship of mutual respect, where I'm not just a resource for you to use, I'll be here. But until then, I need to take care of myself." And then I hung up. I hung up the phone on my daughter. And you know what happened? I didn't fall apart. My hands were shaking, my heart was beating fast, but I felt strangely powerful. I had set a boundary, finally. I called Dorothy immediately and told her what had happened. She almost screamed with joy over the phone. She said that was the first day of my new life, that I had taken the most difficult and important step. In the following weeks, Rebecca didn't call, didn't send a message, nothing. There were moments when I almost gave in, almost picked up the phone to call her and apologize, go back to the old pattern. But Dorothy and the other women in the group held me back. They reminded me that setting boundaries wasn't punishing Rebecca, it was saving myself. They reminded me that true love includes respect, and that I deserve to be respected. I started going to the weekly Circle of Recovery meetings religiously. Each meeting was a revelation. Hearing the other women's stories, their recovery journeys, their triumphs and challenges, made me feel less alone. I learned there was a name for what I had done: codependency. I had become codependent on Rebecca, deriving all my self-esteem from being needed by her, sacrificing my own identity in the process. And Rebecca, without realizing it, had become a person who expected that sacrifice as something guaranteed, without real value. I also started individual therapy with a wonderful psychologist named Catherine, who specialized in dysfunctional family dynamics. The sessions were intense and painful. Catherine made me explore my own childhood, how my parents had raised me to believe that my value was in serving others, especially as a woman. She made me see patterns I had repeated without realizing. But she also helped me develop tools to establish and maintain healthy boundaries. 2 months after that phone call, I was at a local art gallery on a Friday night, something I would never have done before. Dorothy had dragged me there saying I needed to start living, not just existing. The gallery was having an exhibition of local amateur artists, and there was live music, wine, people talking and laughing. I felt out of place at first, but Dorothy introduced me to several people, and soon I was having interesting conversations about art, life, experiences. It was there that I met Henry, a widowed gentleman of 67 who also painted watercolors. We talked for hours about painting techniques, about colors, about how art had saved us in difficult times. It wasn't romantic, but it was human. It was real connection, something I had forgotten how it felt. Henry invited me to a painting group that met on Saturdays in the park, and I accepted. For the first time in decades, I was making friends based on shared interests, not just through my daughter or work. In the 3rd month, I finally bought the ticket to Italy. It was a 2-week trip, something that seemed absurdly extravagant and scary. I spent much of the money I had saved, money I would normally have given to Rebecca without thinking twice. But this time, I was investing in myself. When I told the group, everyone applauded. Dorothy had tears in her eyes with pride. Patricia hugged me and said I was inspiring her to take her own dream trip. It was also during this period that I reduced my working hours at the hospital. I talked to the administration and explained my health situation. They were surprisingly understanding and offered me a part-time position with benefits maintained. It meant less money? Yes, but it also meant more life, more time to paint, to be with friends, to do therapy, to take care of myself. Then, on a rainy Tuesday 4 months after that phone call, my cell phone rang. It was Rebecca. My first instinct was to ignore it, to protect the peace I had built. But something made me answer. Her voice on the other side was different, softer, almost hesitant. She asked if we could talk, if she could see me. I felt my heart accelerate, but I kept my voice calm and replied, yes, we could talk, but at a neutral cafe, not at her place or mine. I was applying another thing I had learned in therapy, controlling the environment of difficult conversations. We scheduled for 2 days later at a small cafe I liked in the middle of the afternoon. When I arrived at the cafe, Rebecca was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked different, less polished and confident than she usually appeared. She had dark circles under her eyes, looked tired, vulnerable. When our eyes met, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, genuine emotion. I sat down, ordered tea, and waited. Rebecca began to speak, and what she said completely caught me by surprise. She said she had been going to therapy. That her fiancé, someone I didn't even know existed because she had never told me she was in a serious relationship, had given an ultimatum. Either she resolved her problems with her mother, or he wouldn't marry her. Initially, Rebecca had been furious with him, but he had been firm, saying he wouldn't build a family with someone who treated their own mother the way she treated me. This had forced Rebecca to confront her behavior for the first time. Rebecca started crying, real tears streaming down her face, without her trying to hide them. She said that the therapist had made her see things she had never realized, that she had grown up feeling suffocated by my love, but also completely dependent on it. That she had never learned to value what I did, because I was always there, always available, making everything seem easy. She said that when she was in college and saw friends whose mothers set boundaries, said no, had their own lives, she secretly thought they were lucky, but had never connected that to the fact that she didn't respect me. She said she had seen me as eternal, invincible, that she had never really processed that I was a real person with real needs. And when I finally set a boundary, when I finally said no, her world had collapsed because she realized how much she had taken for granted. She told me that in the last few months she had reflected a lot, that she had read books about healthy parent-child relationships, about codependency, about how to be a real adult. She said she had realized that I had done her a disservice too, by never letting her truly grow up, by always solving all her problems, by never letting her feel the consequences of her choices. She said this had created in her a person who felt entitled to everything, selfish, incapable of genuine empathy, and that she hated the person she had become. Rebecca apologized, a deep and genuine apology that clearly came from a place of true understanding and regret. She said she didn't expect me to forgive her immediately, that she understood if I wanted to keep my distance, but that she wanted the chance to build a real relationship with me, one based on mutual respect. I listened to everything in silence, letting the tears fall freely down my face. When she finished, I took a deep breath and said something I had prepared with Catherine in therapy. I said, "Rebecca, I thank you for these words. I can see that you're genuinely working on yourself, and that brings me hope. But I need you to understand some things. First, I also failed in our dynamic. I didn't establish healthy boundaries. I became your servant instead of your mother, and that hurt both of us. I'm working on myself too. Second, rebuilding our relationship will take time. We can't just go back to normal because there was nothing normal about what we had before. Third, things will be different from now on. I have my own life now, my own plans, my own priorities. I'm no longer going to be available 24 hours a day. I'm no longer going to solve all your problems. I'm no longer going to give money without considering my own needs. If you can accept that, if you're willing to build something new and healthier, then yes, I would very much like to try." Rebecca nodded yes, vigorously, saying she understood and accepted everything. We ordered more coffee and spent the next 2 hours really talking, perhaps for the first time in our lives. She told me about her fiancé, James, an orthopedic surgeon who had lost his own mother young and deeply valued healthy family relationships. She told me about her therapy, about the difficult things she was discovering about herself. And for the first time, she asked me questions about my life. Real questions about how I was, what I was doing, what my plans were. I told her about my trip to Italy, about the painting group, about my new friends. I saw genuine surprise and something that looked like admiration in her eyes. She said she had never seen me as a person separate from her, with dreams and a life of my own, and that she was happy I was finally living for myself. When we said goodbye that day, Rebecca hugged me for real, not one of those quick automatic hugs, but a long, tight embrace. She whispered in my ear, "I love you, Mom, really. And I'm going to prove it with actions, not just words." I felt my heart fill with cautious hope. I knew the journey wasn't complete, that there would be ups and downs, that testing boundaries and rebuilding trust would take time. But for the first time, I felt there was a real chance we could have a healthy relationship. In the following months, Rebecca kept her word. She started calling me regularly, not when she needed something, but just to talk, to see how I was. She introduced me to James, who was truly wonderful, and treated me with genuine respect from the first moment. They invited me to dinner a few times, and they were real dinners where we talked like adults, where my opinion was valued, where I wasn't just the useful mother, but a person with interesting thoughts and experiences. Rebecca started taking an interest in my artwork, came to a small exhibition that the painting group organized, bought 2 of my watercolors, and hung them in her apartment. When there was a problem with her apartment and she needed financial help, she asked me if I could lend money, not give it, lend it, and she made a point of signing a loan paper and establishing a payment plan. She was treating me with the respect I deserved. And you know what? When Rebecca started treating me better, when our relationship became more balanced, I discovered I loved her even more. Not that suffocating and anxious love that came from fear and need, but a healthy love based on true mutual appreciation. I saw my daughter become a better person before my eyes. She started being kinder to other people, more aware of her actions, more empathetic. James told me privately that the change in her had been incredible, that she was becoming the woman he always knew she could be. When I finally took my trip to Italy, it was the most liberating thing I had ever done. 2 weeks alone, exploring ancient cities, painting in sunny squares, eating wonderful food, making temporary friends with other travelers. Rebecca sent messages every day, not to control me or complain, but to say she hoped I was having fun, to ask me to share photos, to say she was proud of me. When I returned, she and James picked me up at the airport with flowers and a sign saying, "Welcome home, traveling artist." I cried, but they were tears of joy. Dorothy was right about everything. When I stopped sacrificing myself until I disappeared, when I reclaimed my own life and identity, when I established healthy boundaries, not only did Rebecca start respecting me more, but I started respecting myself more. My health improved dramatically. Dr. Harrison was impressed with my most recent exams. My blood pressure was under control, my heart was stronger, I had more energy. He said that what I had done, the lifestyle changes and especially the reduction of chronic emotional stress, had probably added years, possibly decades, to my life. The circle of recovery continued to be an essential part of my life. Seeing other women starting their journeys, supporting them through the difficult parts, celebrating their victories, gave my life a purpose I had never had. I was no longer just Rebecca's mother. I was Margaret, artist, friend, mentor, traveler, survivor. 1 year after that terrible day in the hospital when Rebecca left me alone, We organized a special Circle of Recovery meeting. It was an anniversary of transformation, celebrating my change, but also recognizing that this journey never really ends. To my surprise, Rebecca asked to be there, to speak to the group. She stood in front of all those women, many of whom had their own stories of ungrateful children, and did something extraordinary. She apologized, not just to me, but to all of them, acknowledging Eero 248 that they probably all had children like she had been. She told her own journey of realization and change. She encouraged any of them who had adult children not to give up hope of change, but also to prioritize themselves first. She said something that stayed with me. Our mothers loved us so much that they forgot to teach us how to love back. But it's never too late to learn. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Several of the women hugged Rebecca afterward, thanking her for her honesty and courage. A few months later, Rebecca and James got married in a small, beautiful ceremony. When it was time for speeches, Rebecca asked to speak. She told all the guests about that day in the hospital, about how she had abandoned her own mother when I needed her most, about how she had been the worst person she could have been. She told about the transformation we had gone through together, and then she said with tears streaming, "My mother taught me what true love is not when she gave everything for me, but when she finally chose herself. She taught me that loving someone means respecting yourself first, setting healthy boundaries, and never becoming invisible for another person. She saved her own life, but by doing so, she also saved mine. She gave me the greatest gift, the chance to become a better person. Mom, I love you, I respect you, and I thank you for having the courage to say no." I couldn't stop crying. It was everything I had always wanted, not a daughter who desperately needed me, but a daughter who genuinely valued me. So now, when I look back at that terrible day in the hospital, when Rebecca turned her back and walked out without looking back, I see it differently. Yes, it was the most painful day of my life, the day my heart broke into millions of pieces, but it was also the day my real life began. It was the day I was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about myself, about my daughter, about our toxic relationship. It was the catalyst that pushed me into a journey of self-discovery and recovery that changed absolutely everything. If that terrible moment hadn't happened, I might have continued on that destructive path until I died, literally. I would have spent my last years increasingly sick, increasingly bitter, increasingly invisible. Instead, I now have a life worth living, healthy relationships, purpose, joy, and yes, a genuine and loving relationship with my daughter. The truth I discovered in that hospital was simple but profound. You can't love another person in a healthy way if you don't love yourself first. You can't teach respect if you don't respect yourself. You can't build balanced relationships if you're always giving without receiving anything in return. And children, as much as we love them, are not naturally grateful. They are naturally self-centered, especially when we were the ones who created that dynamic by always putting them on pedestals. But here's the beautiful part. It's never too late to change. It's never too late to reclaim your life, establish boundaries, start living for yourself. And when you do that, when you finally prioritize yourself, something magical happens. The people around you, especially your children, suddenly see you as a real person. They start respecting you. And the relationship that emerges from that new place is millions of times richer and truer than anything based on sacrifice and martyrdom. Today, as I write this in my little room that I transformed into a beautiful space full of art and life, I look at the photos on the wall. There's one of me in Italy, genuinely smiling under the Tuscan sun. There's one of my painting group, all of us covered in paint and laughing. There's one of Dorothy and me embracing. And there are several of Rebecca and me, but these are different from the old photos. In the old photos, I always looked small, faded, existing only as a backdrop for her to shine. In the new photos, we both shine equally. We look like two strong, independent women who choose to be together, not one desperately dependent on the other. If you're reading this and recognize yourself in my story, if you're a mother, a father, a daughter, a son, living in a similar dynamic, I want you to know there is hope. There is a way out. But it starts with you having the courage to choose yourself, to establish boundaries, to say no even when it's terrifying. It starts with you recognizing that you are a complete and valuable person, not just in relation to another person. It starts with you investing in yourself in the same way you invest in others. And yes, it can hurt at first. The people who are used to you being their doormat will react badly. They will call you selfish. They will try to make you feel guilty. They will create drama. But if you stand firm, if you hold on to your own truth and value, eventually one of two things will happen. Either they will respect your boundaries and the relationship will become healthier, or they will leave your life and you will discover that you're better off without them. I'm now 64 years old. I lost a lot of time, many years that I could have lived fully. But I refuse to lament. I'm alive now, truly alive for the first time perhaps since my 20s. I have plans to travel to Greece next year. I'm considering taking an art history course. I'm dating a kind man I met in the painting group. Nothing serious yet, but it's beautiful to have someone who sees me as an interesting woman, not just as someone's mother. Rebecca is pregnant now. I'm going to be a grandmother in a few months. And you know what the most beautiful part is? I'm excited, but not anxious. I'm going to love this baby deeply. I'm going to be a wonderful grandmother. But I'm not going to make the same mistakes. I'm going to have healthy boundaries. I'm not going to become a full-time babysitter unless I want to. I'm not going to sacrifice myself until I disappear. And Rebecca understands that. She respects that. She even thanks me for it because she knows it will be better for everyone. The life that almost killed me, that life of infinite sacrifice and invisibility, is the past. The life I'm living now, a life of balance, mutual respect, healthy boundaries, and continuous self-discovery, is my present and my future. That moment in the hospital, when my daughter left me alone and my heart broke, was actually the moment I was saved. It was when I finally learned the most important lesson. I am important. My life matters. My needs are valid. And choosing myself is not selfishness. It's survival. It's health. It's self-love. And only from a place of genuine self-love can I truly love others in a healthy way. So if you're watching this and recognize yourself in some part of my story, I invite you to start your own journey today. Don't wait for a heart attack, a collapse, a moment of extreme crisis. Start now. Write in a notebook about who you were before you lost yourself in serving others. Find a therapist. Look for support groups. Establish a small boundary today, then another tomorrow. Invest in something just for you, even if it's just half an hour doing something you love. Remember that you are a complete and valuable person exactly as you are, not for what you do for others. And if this resonated with you, leave a comment below telling your story, because sharing our experiences is how we heal together. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories of transformation and recovery. And give a like if this message touched your heart, because it helps reach other people who need to hear this. Remember, choosing yourself is not abandoning your loved ones, it's becoming capable of truly loving them. Your life matters, you matter, and it's never, never too late to start over.